She poured his coffee with shaking hands. He looked up and asked her one simple question. And the answer she gave him made the most feared men in the city go completely silent. If you're watching this, stay until the end, because what happens after that question will change both their lives forever. Let me take you back to where it all began. There's a small diner on the edge of the city, the kind of place most people forget the moment they leave it. Cracked vinyl seats, a bell above the door that never rings right, and a coffee machine that groans every time it's turned on. It's not the kind of place you'd expect to find the woman who would one day shake the foundations of the most powerful crime empire in the country. But that's exactly where Elena Voss worked, every single night, from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. She was 26 years old, tired in the way that only people who carry too much alone get tired. Her father had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving behind medical debt that never seemed to shrink no matter how many double shifts she picked up. Her mother lived 2 states away in a care facility, and every dollar Elena made went straight into keeping her there. She didn't complain. She didn't have time to. She just kept moving, kept smiling at customers who barely looked at her, kept refilling cups of coffee that never seemed to end. She had no idea that her life was about to collide with a man whose name alone could empty a room. His name was Damian Cole. If you don't know that name, ask anyone who's ever done business in the underworld of this city, and you'll see their face change. Damian didn't just run an empire, he was the empire. Shipping ports, private security firms, real estate developments that looked legitimate on paper but moved more than just goods underneath. He inherited some of it from his father, built the rest with his own hands, and buried anyone foolish enough to test him. People feared him not because he was loud or cruel for the sake of it, but because he was calm. Terrifyingly calm. He never raised his voice. He never had to. When Damian Cole walked into a room, the air itself seemed to listen. And on one ordinary, rainy Tuesday night, that calm, calculating man walked into a diner he had never been to before, for reasons even he didn't fully understand. He was supposed to be somewhere else that night, a meeting with men who answered to him, men who were nervously waiting at a warehouse 3 blocks away. But his car had broken down, his phone had died, and the rain was falling so hard that visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The diner's flickering sign was the only light he could see. He stepped inside, soaked, irritated, and completely out of his element. And that's when he saw her. Elena didn't recognize him. She didn't know his name, didn't know the weight it carried, didn't know that the men sliding into the corner booth could end careers, end businesses, end lives with a single phone call. To her, he was just another customer. Tired eyes. Expensive coat. The kind of silence that made her a little nervous, but nothing she hadn't dealt with before. "Coffee, black," he said, without looking up from the rain-streaked window. She nodded, poured it, and set it down gently in front of him. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but exhaustion. She'd been on her feet for 9 hours straight. He noticed. That's the thing about men like Damian Cole. They notice everything. The way she favored her left foot like it ached more than the right. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The faded bruise on her wrist that she kept tugging her sleeve over, like she was used to hiding things. He said nothing. Not yet. But something about her, something quiet, something unbroken despite everything she was clearly carrying, made him stay longer than he intended. Stay with me, because the next thing he did was something none of his men would have ever expected from him. And it's the reason everything that follows happened the way it did. He stayed until closing. For 3 hours, Damian Cole sat in that booth, nursing the same cup of coffee, watching the diner empty out until it was just him and Elena, and an old cook named Walter cleaning grills in the back. Elena tried not to stare at him too long. There was something about the stillness in his eyes that made her uneasy, like looking at a locked door you knew you weren't supposed to open. When she finally brought him the check, he didn't reach for his wallet right away. Instead, he asked her the question. "What would you do?" he said quietly, if I told you I could give you enough money to disappear from this life completely, pay off every debt, give your mother the best care money can buy, and never have to step foot in a place like this again. But in exchange, you'd have to work for me. No questions asked. Elena froze. For a moment, she thought she misheard him. Men didn't say things like that to waitresses unless they wanted something, and in her experience, what they wanted was never good. She set the check down slowly, met his eyes, and gave him an answer that no one, not Damien, not his men, not even she herself, expected. I'd say no, she said. Because the moment I take money from a stranger with no questions asked, I stop being someone who can look at herself in the mirror. And I've lost enough in my life. I'm not losing that too. The diner went silent except for the hum of the broken neon sign outside. Damien Cole, a man who had bought silence, bought loyalty, bought entire city blocks without blinking, sat there stunned by a woman who had nothing, and still refused to be bought. He left a $100 bill on the table for a $4 coffee, and walked out into the rain without another word. But he didn't forget her. And 3 days later, he came back. This time, it wasn't an accident. Now, before we go further, you need to understand something about Damien's world, because what happens next only makes sense once you know the danger circling underneath the surface of that diner. Damien wasn't just the head of a business empire. He was a man at war. Quietly, invisibly, but a war nonetheless. A rival organization, run by a man named Victor Drajan, had been chipping away at Damien's shipping routes for almost a year, trying to weaken him from the shadows before striking directly. Victor was patient, ruthless, and obsessed with proving that the Cole Empire wasn't untouchable. And Victor had eyes everywhere. Including, as it would soon turn out, inside that very diner. When Damien returned 3 days later, he didn't sit in the booth this time. He walked straight to the counter and waited for Elena to notice him. When she did, her stomach tightened with a strange mixture of nerves and something she didn't want to admit to herself, curiosity. "I'm not here to buy you," he said simply. "I'm here because I have a security position open. Real work. Real paycheck. Reception at one of my office buildings downtown. No favors, no questions, no strings. Just a job that pays triple what you make here." Elena studied him for a long moment. Every instinct told her this was too good to be true, and every instinct she had about men like this had been built from years of disappointment. "Why me?" she asked. Damien's answer was simple, but it would echo in her mind for weeks. "Because you're the only person who's told me the truth in over a decade." She didn't say yes that night. But she didn't say no either. And if you think that's where the danger starts, you have no idea what's coming. Because what Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have known, is that the moment Damien Cole walked into the diner a second time, someone was already watching from across the street, snapping photos, sending them straight to a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity, a way into Damien Cole's life that didn't involve guns or money, but something far more dangerous. A weakness. A person Damien Cole might actually care about. If you want to see what happens when Victor Drajan discovers exactly who Elena is to Damien, and how far he's willing to go to use her against him, stay with me, because the story is only getting started. 2 weeks passed before Elena finally walked through the glass doors of Cole Industries for her first day. She told herself it was just a job. Better pay, better hours, a chance to finally get ahead on her mother's care bills. She told herself there was nothing more to it than that. But the moment she stepped into that marble lobby, with its towering ceilings and security guards who nodded at her like they already knew exactly who she was, she understood that nothing about this place was ordinary, and neither was the man who ran it. Her first encounter with Damien inside his own world was nothing like the quiet diner booth. Here, he moved with absolute authority. Men twice her age lowered their eyes when he passed. Phones rang the second he stepped off the elevator. Every door seemed to open before he even reached for it. She realized, with a chill crawling up her spine, exactly how small her world had been compared to his. But what unsettled her most wasn't his power. It was the way he looked at her when no one else was watching, like she was the only steady thing in a building full of people terrified of him. For the first month, things were simple. She answered phones, organized files, learned the rhythm of his office. She told herself this was just work. But late one evening, while she was finishing up some paperwork after most of the staff had gone home, she overheard something she was never supposed to hear. Two of Damien's senior men were speaking in hushed, urgent voices near his office door. Victor's men were spotted near the diner again, one of them said. 3 times this week. They know about her. Elena's blood went cold. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stood frozen behind a stack of filing cabinets, listening to her entire understanding of the past month shatter into pieces. This wasn't just a job. She had become a target. And the man who promised her safety, stability, a way out of her old life, he was the very reason her life was now in danger. When she finally worked up the courage to confront him about it the next day, marching into his office with her heart hammering and her hands shaking with anger and fear, Damien didn't deny a single word. "You should have told me," she said, her voice cracking with betrayal. "You should have told me the moment you decided to drag me into whatever this is." Damien rose slowly from his desk, his expression unreadable. "If I had told you everything from the start, would you have come?" "No," she snapped. "Which is exactly why you should have told me." For the first time since she'd met him, Damien Cole looked almost human, almost vulnerable. "I didn't expect to care this much about what happened to you," he admitted quietly. "And now that I do, I'm not going to apologize for trying to protect you the only way I know how." Elena stood there, torn between fury and something far more complicated stirring beneath it. Because as terrifying as his world was, as dangerous as everything around him had become, she couldn't deny the way her chest tightened whenever he looked at her like that, like she mattered more than the empire he'd built his entire life around. But there was no time to untangle those feelings. Because that night, as Elena walked to her car in the parking garage beneath Cole Industries, a black sedan pulled up beside her, and a man stepped out with a calm, predatory smile that made every hair on her body stand on end. "Elena Voss," he said, like he was tasting her name for the first time. "Damien's new little secret. I've been wanting to meet you." It was Victor Drajan. And what he said next would change everything. If you want to know what Victor offered her, and the impossible choice he forced her to make that night, stay with me, because this is where the real danger begins. Victor circled her slowly, like a wolf assessing prey it hadn't decided whether to kill or use. "You don't know me," he said, "but I know everything about you. Your mother's care facility. Your father's old debts. The diner you used to work at before Damien Cole decided you were interesting enough to pluck out of obscurity." He paused, letting the silence stretch painfully long. "I'm not here to hurt you, Elena. I'm here to offer you a choice he never gave you, the truth." Elena's hands trembled at her sides, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "What truth?" Victor smiled, slow and sharp. "Damien Cole doesn't care about people. He uses them. You're not the first woman he's pulled close when it served him, and you won't be the last. I simply want information. Small things. Where he goes. Who he meets. Nothing that would ever put you in danger. In fact, it would keep you safe from what's coming, because something is coming, and you don't want to be standing next to him when it happens." "I won't betray him," Elena said immediately, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. Victor's smile faded into something colder. "Then I hope, for your sake, that loyalty is worth more to you than your mother's life." The threat hit her like a blow to the chest. She stumbled back against her car, and Victor simply turned and walked away, climbing back into his sedan like he hadn't just shattered the fragile sense of safety she'd been building for weeks. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, replaying his words over and over. Should she tell Damien? Would telling him put her mother in even greater danger? Was there any version of this where she came out unscathed? When she finally walked into his office the next morning, pale and exhausted, Damien knew immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, rising from his chair so fast it nearly toppled. She told him everything. Victor. The parking garage. The threat against her mother. Something shifted in Damien's face, something Elena had never seen before. Not anger. Not the cold calculation he wore like armor. This was something raw. Fear. Real, human fear, for someone other than himself. "I should never have let you get this close to my world," he said, his voice low and tight. "It's a little late for that," Elena replied, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay strong. "So what do we do now?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "Now," he said finally, "I make sure Victor understands exactly what happens to men who threaten the people I care about." The way he said it, calm, final, terrifying, sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Because for the first time, she realized she wasn't just standing beside a powerful man. She was standing beside a man capable of unleashing a war. And she had no idea that the war was about to come crashing down on both of them in ways neither could have predicted. Stay with me, because what Damien did next reshaped everything, and what Elena discovers about his past will leave you speechless. Over the following days, Damien pulled every resource he had into protecting Elena without ever making her feel like a prisoner. He assigned a quiet, watchful man named Marcus to shadow her from a distance, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough that she could almost forget he was there. Her mother's care facility suddenly had extra security at every entrance, paid for without explanation, arranged without her even asking. But more than the protection, what changed was the way Damien began to let her see him, the real him, not the empire, not the legend whispered about in fearful tones across the city, but the man underneath all of it. One evening, after a long day of tense meetings, he found her still at her desk long after everyone else had gone home, staring blankly at a photograph of her father she kept tucked inside her wallet. "Tell me about him," Damien said softly, taking the seat across from her. Elena hesitated, and used to being asked questions like that, gentle, patient, with no hidden motive behind them. "He was a mechanic," she said finally. "Worked with his hands his whole life. Never made much money, but he always said the work you do with honesty is worth more than anything you could steal." Something flickered across Damien's face, guilt, maybe, or longing for a life he never had the chance to live. "My father," he said quietly, "built this empire with fear instead of honesty. He taught me that loyalty only exists when you can guarantee it with money or violence. I spent most of my life believing him." "And now?" Elena asked. Damien looked at her for a long moment, the silence between them heavy with everything neither of them had said aloud yet. "Now," he admitted, "I'm starting to think he was wrong about everything that actually matters." It was a small moment. No dramatic music, no grand declaration. But it was the moment everything between them shifted from caution into something far more dangerous, something neither of them could turn back from. Over the following weeks, their walls came down slowly, carefully, the way trust is built between two people who've both been broken by the world in different ways. Elena learned about the little brother Damien lost in a rival attack when he was only 19, the reason he swore he would never let weakness near his empire again. Damien learned about the nights Elena sat by her father's hospital bed, promising him she would never give up no matter how hard life pushed her down. And slowly, impossibly, in the middle of a war neither of them asked for, they fell for each other. But love, in Damien Cole's world, was never simple. And Victor Drajan was not a man who waited patiently while his enemy grew stronger and happier. One night, nearly 2 months after Elena first started working at Cole Industries, everything came crashing down. She was leaving a late dinner with Damien, their first real dinner together outside the walls of his office, the first time either of them had allowed themselves to feel something close to normal, when gunfire shattered the quiet street outside the restaurant. Chaos erupted. Damien shoved Elena behind a concrete pillar, his body shielding hers as bullets tore through the air. Marcus and 2 other guards returned fire, but it was clear within seconds that this wasn't a random attack. It was a message. When the gunfire finally stopped and the street fell into terrified silence, Damien turned to Elena, checking every inch of her for injuries with hands that trembled for the first time since she'd known him. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice shook violently. "Damien, I'm okay." But Damien wasn't looking at her with relief. He was looking at her with something far darker, a decision forming behind his eyes, one that would change the course of everything. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. "I'm done letting Victor use you as leverage." What Elena didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the attack outside the restaurant wasn't actually orchestrated by Victor at all. It came from somewhere far closer to home. And when the truth finally surfaces, it will shatter everything Elena thought she understood about the people she trusted most. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Southwest, stay close, because the next reveal changes absolutely everything. The morning after the attack, Damien gathered his most trusted men into a private conference room at the top of Coal Industries. The city skyline stretched out behind them like a silent witness to everything about to unfold. Elena sat quietly in the corner, still shaken, still trying to process how close she'd come to losing everything the night before. Marcus, normally calm and unreadable, looked unusually tense as he laid a folder on the table. "It wasn't Victor's men," he said. The room went still. "What do you mean it wasn't Victor's men?" Damien asked, his voice dangerously low. Marcus slid a photograph across the table, grainy security footage, time-stamped from the night before, showing the shooter's face just clearly enough to recognize. Damien's expression didn't just darken. It collapsed into something Elena had never witnessed before, pure, devastating betrayal. The shooter was Tomas Reyes, Damien's own cousin. A man he had trusted with his life since childhood. A man who had been by his side through every battle, every loss, every moment that built the empire Damien now controlled. "There has to be an explanation," Damien said, though his voice betrayed how badly he wanted to believe his own words. There was an explanation. And it was worse than anyone could have imagined. Marcus continued, his voice careful, like he was handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. "Tomas has been working with Victor for the past 8 months. Slowly feeding him information. Routes, schedules, security weaknesses." He paused. "He's the reason Victor knew about Elena in the first place." The room fell into stunned silence. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. The men who had sat beside Damien at family dinners, who had laughed with him over old memories, who Damien trusted with secrets even his own father never knew, that men had been the one feeding their enemy every weakness in Damien's armor for months. "Why?" Damien finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated before answering. "Because Victor promised him control over the western shipping routes once you were out of the picture. Tomas didn't want to kill you, Damien. He wanted to replace you." Damien closed his eyes, absorbing the full weight of the betrayal. Not just a rival circling from the outside, a wound from within, carved by someone who had once felt like family. And the worst part? Tomas was still out there. Still trusted by half the organization, still capable of striking again before anyone could stop him. Elena watched Damien's hands clench into fists on the table, his entire body radiating a controlled, terrifying fury. She had seen him calm. She had seen him calculating. But this was something else entirely, a man staring directly into the wreckage of everything he thought he could trust. "I want him found," Damien said quietly. "Tonight." But before anyone could move, Elena spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "Wait. If Tomas finds out you know, he'll run, or worse, he'll come after me again to use as leverage before you can reach him. We need a plan, not panic." Damien looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes, respect, mixed with the unbearable fear of almost losing her the night before. "What do you suggest?" Elena took a steadying breath. "Let him think his plan worked. Let him think Victor's attack succeeded in shaking you. Draw him out instead of hunting him down." It was a dangerous gamble. But it was also the only way to end this without more bloodshed, more attacks, more sleepless nights wondering who else might be hiding in the shadows of Damien's own empire. Damien studied her for a long moment, something like a breaking through his guarded expression. "You're not just brave," he said quietly. "You think like someone who's been fighting her whole life." "I have been," Elena replied softly. "Just not with guns." And so, the trap was set. But what neither of them realized, what would shake the very foundation of everything they'd built together, was that Tomas wasn't working alone. And the second name behind the betrayal would hit far closer to Elena's own life than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you absolutely stunned. 3 days into their plan, everything seemed to be falling into place. Damien played the part perfectly, a man rattled, distracted, pulling back his usual security to appear vulnerable. Word spread quickly through the organization, exactly as intended, reaching the ears of anyone loyal to Tomas's quiet rebellion. Elena, meanwhile, was tasked with something far more delicate. Since Tomas had used her as a pressure point once already, Damien wanted her to appear isolated, easier to reach, in hopes that Tomas would make a move trying to use her again, this time directly into a trap designed to catch him in the act. It was terrifying. But Elena agreed without hesitation, because she understood something Damien hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was hers too. On the 4th night, exactly as predicted, Elena received a message from an unknown number, asking her to meet at a small park near her old apartment, an address Tomas wouldn't have known unless he had been watching her for far longer than anyone realized. Damien's men were already in position, hidden discreetly around the perimeter, waiting for Tomas to show himself. But when Elena arrived at the park, heart pounding, pretending to be unaware of the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair connecting her to Damien's voice, the person who stepped out from the shadows wasn't Tomas. It was someone Elena recognized immediately, someone whose presence made her entire body go cold with horror. It was Walter. The old cook from the diner. The quiet, grandfatherly man who had worked beside her for years, who had slipped her free meals on nights she couldn't afford to eat, who had been nothing but kind to her for as long as she'd known him. "Walter," she whispered, her voice trembling with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Walter's expression, usually warm and tired, had transformed into something calculating, almost sorrowful. "I'm sorry, Elena. I never wanted you involved in any of this." "Involved in what?" she asked, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. "Victor's been paying me for information for almost 2 years, Walter admitted quietly. Long before Damien ever walked into that diner. I needed the money for my granddaughter's surgery. I never thought it would lead to anything dangerous. I just passed along small things, schedules, regulars, nothing that mattered." He paused, guilt heavy in his voice. "Until the night Damien Cole walked through the door and asked for a cup of coffee." Elena felt her entire understanding of the past months crumble beneath her. Walter, sweet, harmless Walter, had been the one who first alerted Victor to Damien's growing interest in her, the spark that ignited everything that followed. "You did this," she said, her voice breaking. "You started all of this." "I didn't know it would go this far," Walter said, his eyes glistening with regret. "But Victor doesn't let people walk away once they're in. I'm here because he sent me. He wants Damien to know exactly how deep his betrayal runs, through people he never even suspected." Through her earpiece, Elena heard Damien's voice, low and urgent. "Elena, get out of there. Now." But before she could move, a second figure emerged from the darkness behind Walter, Tomas, finally showing himself, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Walter here was just the beginning," Tomas said, stepping closer. Victor wanted you to understand something tonight, Elena. There's no one left for either of you to trust. Not your old life. Not your new one. Elena's pulse roared in her ears as she realized, with horrifying clarity, that she was standing in the middle of a trap within a trap, and Damien's men, positioned for an ambush against Tomas alone, had no idea Walter would be there too, no idea how complicated tonight had just become. This is exactly the moment everything was building toward. And what happens in the next 60 seconds will determine whether Elena walks away from this park alive. Stay with me, because the climax of this story is about to begin. Elena's mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to run, but her feet stayed planted, her training from months of careful observation around dangerous men kicking in despite her fear. Damien's not as distracted as you think, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You think a man like him would actually let his guard down completely, even for me? Tomas's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, the first crack of doubt in his carefully constructed plan. That fraction of a second was all Damien's men needed. From the shadows surrounding the park, 4 of Damien's most trusted guards emerged simultaneously, weapons raised, surrounding Tomas before he could even reach for the gun hidden beneath his jacket. Walter froze immediately, hands raised, his face crumbling with the realization that his small, desperate betrayal had led him directly into the center of a war far bigger than he ever understood. Damien himself stepped out last, his presence radiating a cold, controlled fury that silenced everything around him. "Cousin," he said quietly, the word dripping with years of shattered trust. "I gave you everything. My loyalty. My protection. My family's name. And you sold it for a handful of shipping routes." Tomas's bravado cracked completely under the weight of Damien's stare. "You don't understand what it's like," he said, his voice rising with desperate anger. "Always second. Always the cousin, never the heir. Victor offered me something you never would, a chance to actually matter. You mattered to me," Damien said, his voice breaking slightly despite his best effort to stay composed. "That should have been enough." For a moment, something almost like regret flickered across Tomas's face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold resignation. "It's too late for regret now," he said. Damien's eyes shifted to Walter, who stood trembling beside Tomas, clearly terrified, clearly out of his depth in a world he never intended to be part of. "And you," Damien said quietly. "An old man feeding information to a monster because you needed help for your granddaughter." "I'm sorry," Walter whispered, tears slipping down his weathered face. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to save her life." Elena stepped forward then, placing a gentle hand on Damien's arm, her voice soft but firm. "He's not like Tomas. He didn't choose betrayal for power. He chose it out of desperation." Damien studied her for a long moment, the fury in his eyes slowly tempered by the quiet compassion radiating from her. Finally, he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Walter goes free," Damien said. "On one condition. He never speaks to Victor again, and his granddaughter's surgery is paid in full, by me, no strings attached." Walter broke down completely, sobbing with relief and shame in equal measure, repeating apologies that no longer needed to be spoken. But for Tomas, there was no such mercy waiting. "You betrayed family," Damien said, his voice now ice-cold and final. "And in our world, that's a debt that can never simply be forgiven." What happened to Tomas in the moments that followed would be whispered about for years within the organization, not violence in front of Elena's eyes, because Damien, despite everything, refused to let her witness something that dark, but a quiet, absolute removal from every part of the empire he once stood to inherit. Stripped of power. Stripped of protection. Sent away to face consequences that would unfold far from Elena's sight, but in a world like Damien's, everyone understood exactly what that meant. The true mastermind, Victor Drajan, remained untouched that night, slipping further into the shadows, already calculating his next move, already furious that his carefully laid trap had failed. But for Elena and Damien, standing together in the quiet aftermath of chaos, something had shifted permanently between them. "You saved Walter's life tonight," Damien said softly, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, open, unguarded, completely vulnerable. "You let me," Elena replied. "That's not something the men I met in that diner would have done." Damien reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering against her cheek. "Maybe that man didn't know what it felt like to actually care about someone more than his own empire," he said quietly. "Until you." The tension between them, built over months of danger, secrets, and slowly crumbling walls, finally broke in that quiet park beneath the city lights. Elena closed the distance between them, and Damien met her halfway, the kiss soft and certain, carrying the weight of everything they had survived together to reach this single, fragile moment of peace. But peace, in Damien Cole's world, never lasts long. Because 3 weeks later, a message arrived at Cole Industries that would shatter the fragile safety they had just begun to build. It was from Victor. And it contained only 7 words. "This isn't over. Not even close." If this story moved you, if you felt every twist alongside Elena and Damien, type Part 2 in the comments below, because Victor's next move is coming, and it's more dangerous than anything you've seen so far. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter of this story is going to be unforgettable. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in Part 2.